The small abstract that I sent was concerned with another issue. I wanted to speak on body image boundaries. In the 70s, there were a number of works showing that those who had fantasies of their body image being bounded by hard borders have different kind of reactions in social life as well as in matters of psychosomatic illnesses. And those who saw their body boundaries as permeable, porous, had a different set of psychosomatic illnesses and different ways of looking at encroachment of any kind in their private sphere. For instance, those who saw their body images as hard, impermeable, usually had, say for instance, psychosomatic illnesses like skin allergies. Those who had a more porous concept of body image, who saw their body image as permeable, had usually something like bronchial asthma, psychosomatic origin, and so on and so forth. But while listening to these deliberations on the first day, when somebody mentioned that we were beginning on the longest day of the year, it struck me that actually we are ending on a day which is celebrated or rather remembered all over the world as Anti-Torture Day. Anti-Torture Day, 26 June. And I thought that there has been a hidden dialogue between Europe and India in the matter of torture over the last 200 years. Both have a glorious and illustrious record in the matter of torture. Now, Europe, in the meanwhile, has decided to take a position against torture. Recently, only last week, Britain has decided to compensate victims of torture who suffered during the Mau Mau rebellion in Kenya during British rule. Britain has not even woken up to the fact that in the Andaman's jail, where the Indian freedom fighters were usually exiled, political prisoners were exiled to Andaman Islands, an entire wall was covered by a display of instruments of torture to intimidate the prisoners and the newcomers who were going to Andamans. And there are lurid descriptions of the kind of tortures which these prisoners were subjected to. Many died of it, many turned insane. So I decided to talk on torture because that is one site where the body becomes the site of political negotiation and contestation for power. And I propose, as my first proposition, that in that negotiation, overtly, there are only two parties, the one who is tortured and the one who is inflicting torture, the torturer. But underlying this dyadic relationship, there is also at least two more crucial players. There are, first of all, those who know that there is torture in their society, but see it as a matter of course or as something which is unfortunately there, but they don't have to bother about it. They like not to think about it. To borrow a term from novelist Bernard Schlink, they can be called accommodators or acceptors. Now, India is full of them, accommodators and acceptors, because torture ritually takes place now in India on virtually all major cases, particularly when they involve national security or terrorism. But there is also invisible, a fourth kind of actors who take a position against torture and oppose it. They are invisible because they are seen as eccentrics, people who are unversed in the hard reality of realpolitik and statecraft. And this idea of realpolitik and statecraft is derived from the long tradition of the nation-state system and what Indians think is the process of catching up with the West. India has been, like China, consistently trying over the last 200 years to catch up with the West by building a nation-state system, a Westphalian, post-Westphalian nation-state system that will match Europe. And both these countries, 40% of the world, believe that they can do so by accepting Western concept of statecraft, by which they mean 19th century European imperial concept of statecraft, which they have experienced. So European Union's effort to sell India the idea of this Convention Against Torture, which India is still refusing to sign, because in the heart of us they feel that this is they're doing because they feel secure, because they feel they have undergone the phase through which we are now going and are comfortable with their share in the dominant power system in the world. And therefore they are telling us to sign this convention, whereas we are in a state where our nation state is still vulnerable, and it is a ploy for which we should not fall. So these are the four set of actors in the matter of torture. Now, so far so good, but persons like us who oppose torture and would like to this convention to be signed are convinced, and not on ethical grounds only, but also empirical grounds, that a society which deploys or allows the deployment of torture as an instrument of state power also has to face certain consequences of that decision. I say so partly because many years ago, it was Frantz Fanon who first drew my attention to it. Fanon is not ready in India because Indian left thinks that he's kind of a odd francophone species which have nothing to do with the real Marxism, which is Leninism of some kind or other. So no strain of Indian left really did him seriously. But Fanon, being a psychiatrist, was the first to notice. Actually, his theory went against it. He was convinced that between the perpetrators and the victim, between the torturer and the tortured, there was a clear binary division. That this was an inevitable byproduct of colonial rule. And this colonial rule had to be thrown out violently, and that use of violence will be kind of a cleansing violence. But underneath that political conviction and that ideology was an awareness in him as a psychiatrist. There was something more, because he found out that those who functioned as torturers under the French system in Algeria, he found out that they took their experience with them outside their official work into their family and domesticity and into their private life. In other words, the torturer's experience went with him to his home. He became violent at home. He began to behave in a different kind of fashion. that he thought violence was a normal way of intervening in domestic quarrels or domestic unhappiness or domestic differences. And also, there was this there was this tendency to carry the violence into the larger community. And he did not say so, but he seemed to recognize that the experience of torture in a two-person situation ultimately spills over the situation and gradually brutalizes the society. Subsequently, a lot of work of this kind is available to us. We know that torture, always a system of torture established, ultimately is autonomous of that particular situation. It becomes a part of the system, that it begins to color the institutional patterning. And the very fact that there are people who accept or accommodate them makes it easier for that culture to gradually spread in the society. It ultimately begins to brutalize the entire society. It is a bit like some years ago in Kampuchea, a friend of mine had a chance to interview a woman who was accused of killing her husband because he was having an affair with some other woman. Now, she got hold of a grenade from one of the people selling old war ammunitions and entered the market where her husband was a fruit seller and threw the grenade at him. Of course, he died, but along with him, another 40 people died. And my friend had a chance to interview her. And ultimately, she did more or less indirectly say that the old experience of the Pol Pot regime and the genocide which Kampuchea has gone, which killed nearly one-third of Kampuchea's entire population, did leave its marks behind, and she had not thought of it. This I consider a classical instance of the kind of brutalization I'm talking about. Apart from that, in India, for instance, you will find that torture, which is often used systematically against terrorist groups for information, and this requirement is blamed on the needs of national security. In Punjab, for example, terrorism has died. Yes, terrorism has died, but the police itself has become the terroristic instrument now used by various factions and groups within Punjab to settle scores with their enemies, or even to take revenge when somebody's son runs away with your daughter, elopes with your daughter, and you want to take it out on the family and so on and so forth. So in one sense, the culture of torture doesn't die, even when the institutional needs for torture are over. The situation has changed. I'm saying, in other words, that there is a continuity between the torturer and the torture, and the body is the site of that negotiation, because it is there that the personal strength of the being tortured is tested against the will of the torturer. The torturer waits for the moment when the tortured screams for mercy or say out alive that he will reveal whatever he knows. But the torturer may not even respond. And there are instances of this, that the will of the torturer is stronger, and you have not been able, even after all the torture, to get the information out of him. There, the torturer is defeated. And this battle between torturer and tortured is a prototypical battle in this kind of violence. It is almost like the externalization of the battle with a soldier trained to kill fights within himself to kill. You will be surprised to hear that in World War II, only 15% of the soldiers fired their rifles to kill according to available data. Because they are trained to fire and fight, but not trained to kill. It's not easy to produce a killer. It's not easy to produce a torturer either. Like hanging. Torturers in a country like India come mainly from the underside and the margins of the society. They come from the exile, you can call, who have no other option but take that kind of position to be the instrument of this new kind of system. And in some sense, the survival of the institution is torture is part of our dependence on these groups to do the nasty work on our behalf. Otherwise, the political. Anyway, I'm coming to the end of my thing. Give me a minute to mind. Now, I would suggest, as my final comment, that this has been a very happy occasion and we have heard the good things of life. But if some attention is given to the way the metaphor of the body has been used in two ways that we have not discussed, is made more accessible and to pay some attention to it. One is the metaphor of the body to justify, endorse, and legitimize a social evolutionist concept of history, a way of constructing time itself. Then, what we are today, and this is not only Europe, this is a shared problem, that what we are today, you can be that tomorrow. And what we were yesterday, you are today. And if you want to progress, and if you read the right textbooks, if you become an obedient student of this social evolutionary process, then you better appoint us as your consultants, because we know your future better than you know, because we are living it today. You will live it in the future. And what you are, that also we know better, because what you are today, we have been through it and transcended it. You know, it is that a different kind of dialogue, and the more big, as we become more sensitive, if we are more sensitive to it, at least one aspect, one undiscussed aspect of the metaphor of the body is taken care of. And if the other part of the story is also recognized, that though the body is the site on which a political battle can be fought, this has to be politically, you can put into a political negotiation on the body, nonetheless, there is a continuity between the oppressor and the victim, or the victor and the defeated. And maybe that reconciliation too has some meaning for our enterprise.